Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Eric Corbett, and I'm co-presenting this paper with my professor, Yanni Loukissas. And our paper's titled Engaging Gentrification as a Social Justice Issue in HCI. So this paper serves as a call to action for the HCI community on engaging with gentrification and technology. So this talk is going to go over a little bit about sort of why we should be doing this and how. And so there are three concepts that motivate this work. First is place, how people understand and relate and make places in the built environment, how places are made to change over time through different forces, and the ways in which technology can be made to mediate changes to place, either as a force of gentrification or a means of resisting or countering it. And so illustrate these three concepts through an example of two places. In particular, two neighborhoods, Greenpoint and Bedford-Stuyvesant, which are located in Brooklyn, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. Places like Greenpoint and Bed-Stuy are constructed by the everyday practices of people living there, through naming, through identification, through representation, and ultimately in the relationships people have formed with these places. These places have memories, they have meanings, they have histories, and they have social connections with their inhabitants. For instance, Greenpoint is affectionately known as Little Poland for its multi-generational families of Polish descent. Whereas Bed-Stuy is a historically African-American neighborhood and a major center of cultural capital for African-Americans in New York City, it's sort of an extension of the intellectual and social explosion of the Harlem Renaissance. And yet both of these places are experiencing changes due to the collective process of settlement by higher income people. For instance, while Bed-Stuy is still 59% black today, it has seen an over 700% increase in its white population in the last decade. Whereas the influx of non-Polish whites is challenging the identity of Greenpoint as Little Poland. And so the rapid arrival of these outsiders is disrupting the existing meanings and social relationships with these places, and can at times result in the physical displacement of the people living there by increasing rent or forcing them to be evicted in the ways that the housing market is responding to these new affluent incomers. And so this change process underway is what urban scholars typically call gentrification, which is often thought primarily as a result of the combination of political systems and economic markets. And yet these change processes underway cannot be explained entirely through political systems or economic markets. While it is true that private investors have disinvested in these neighborhoods starting in the early 50s, and through a combination of how local government responded to infrastructure challenges, the physical environment was degraded, setting up this situation for these affluent outsiders to come in and move, while the outside neighborhoods' rent prices were increasing. But again, we're missing the entire picture if we only understand these in terms of these larger sort of socio-political forces. Rather, we must also understand these changes as social constructions, the products and desires and aspirations of the outsiders drawn to these neighborhoods. Right? Why do they want to come here and live? Indeed, we must understand gentrification as a practice, which in fact would not occur without the gentrifiers who wish to participate in this process. Given this, we must also explore the ways in which gentrification might be mediated as a practice through technology. And so to illustrate this relationship between gentrification and technology, we turn to a recent work by the influential gentrification scholar Sharon Zukin. Sharon's work was a study of Yelp. She wanted to understand how both Greenpoint and Bed-Stuy were collectively represented on Yelp through the reviews of restaurants in these places. And so for those of you unfamiliar, Yelp is an online database of consumer reviews that evaluate and offer comments on local businesses. By the time the website celebrated its 10th anniversary, it boasted an archive of over 61 million reviews that were read in more than 138 million unique visitors per month in more than 20 different countries around the world. And so Zukin's study was trying to understand how the desire to experience the culture of food in these historic communities by Yelp reviewers, mostly white, mostly well-off, college-educated women, may encourage, confirm, or even accelerate the process of gentrification by signaling that a locality is good for people who share their taste. And so to do so, Zukin collected and analyzed several thousand reviews of restaurants in both of these places. The focus of her discourse analysis that she conducted on these reviews was not on the quality of food or service at these restaurants, but rather on how the surrounding communities were described. And so this is just a little taste of their findings. So for instance, these are some of the reviews, some of the discourse around Greenpoint. For instance, Greenpoint was commonly felt to be a cozy place, authentic. It was described as authentically European, right? Because it's the Polish descent, right? The Polish immigrants. One reviewer noted that it's an excellent example of the Polish community's enduring presence in Brooklyn. One reviewer noted how I hope the traditional Polish influence in the neighborhood sticks around even as these changes are undergoing, right? And so in this way, the reviewers had an overall positive view of the neighborhood and felt the changes that were actually threatening the historic culture of this neighborhood, and in this way was something that needed to be resisted. In contrast, we can look at the discourse around Bed-Stuy, commonly described as sketchy, gritty, ghetto. One reviewer had to brave the dark alleys of Bed-Stuy to reach her restaurant. One reviewer even went all out and said, once I stepped out of the door, I wanted to go back inside. Gasp. It's terror. The neighborhood is a little scary, and that's putting it nicely. And so we can contrast the discourse around Bed-Stuy, where this ongoing gentrification is celebrated as a needed and welcome change, with little desire to preserve the culture or history of the neighborhood. Again, so based on these findings, Zukin asserts that the reviewers are in fact superimposing racialized ideologies onto places via Yelp's map. The map interface, overlaid with the discursive investments of the reviewers, combined to have a powerful effect on gentrification, as Zukin argued. Not only do Yelp reviewers create economic value for individual business and business owners, they also make a discursive investment in gentrification. And so in this way, rather than simply guiding navigation through space, Yelp is engaged in a type of placemaking by transforming the way people understand, use, and assign meaning to space. And so paralleling Zukin's study, we have some ongoing work studying the online real estate media platform Zillow, where we conducted a similar discourse analysis. If you see this green box down here, this is a real estate listing. And we wanted to understand, we're looking at this locally in Atlanta, around if the discourse of gentrification sort of exists on this platform, which in and of itself is again, a media market for housing, for the housing market. So the findings here would be even more sort of significant than Yelp, which is more about restaurants. And this is ongoing, but just a little snippet of what we're sort of finding is that, some of these listings are in fact gesturing to this discourse around change, right? Like, this is a booming area. It's hot. The neighborhood is hot. What does that mean? What is a hot neighborhood? Currently experiencing significant development, right? Oh, yes, we have to get in here quickly, right? And so in this way, looking at Zukin's findings on Yelp and some of this ongoing work on Zillow that we're currently conducting, we can turn to some of these earlier arguments in HCI from Steve Harrison and Paul Dorish, which really call to attention that the technologically mediated world does not stand apart from the physical world within which it is embedded. Rather, it provides a new set of ways for that physical world to be understood and appropriated. And so if we accept this position on the relationship between place and technology, then we must also begin to examine the potential social justice implications of placemaking in technology, particularly when it comes to gentrification, which can be described as the spatial expression of economic inequality and how it disrupts and displaces existing spatial relationships between people and places along class and often race-based lines, often resulting in dire consequences for the people experiencing it. And so to that end, our research question in this paper is, how should HCI's growing social justice agenda engage with this issue of gentrification? And so this is just a little overview of the paper and what we did. So we started by articulating gentrification as a matter of social justice in HCI by reviewing scholarship on gentrification and the social justice aspects of it and how we should understand those. We focused our attention toward the consumption side perspectives of gentrification. So in gentrification scholarship, there are two threads between production and consumption commonly focuses on the cultural practices of gentrifiers who are doing that work of gentrification. And then we describe how these perspectives can be understood within HCI. We provide three distinct views of these consumption side perspective of gentrification and socio-technical systems by reviewing Zukin's work on Yelp, another ongoing, some other outside work on Nextdoor, and then our ongoing work in Zillow. So we looked at gentrification as a practice in these three platforms. And then finally, the main contribution of the paper is to develop 6 modes of research engagement HCI can pursue with gentrification moving forward. And the remainder of this talk will focus primarily on these. And so to develop these modes, we turn to existing framework of social justice in HCI provided by Dombrowski, Harmon, and Fox, which describes a social justice orientation in HCI as the ways that individuals experience oppression, including how benefits, burdens, obligations, power, opportunity, and privilege have been inequitably distributed within society. Along those lines, the framework provides 6 genres or sort of dimensions that we can pursue, with the first one being recognition, reciprocity, accountability, distribution, enablement, and transformation. So we took each of these dimensions and put them into conversation with the literature on gentrification as well as our findings from these 3 platforms. And we came up with 6 modes of engagement. This is one of them, distribution, which talks about designing socio-technical systems that equitably distribute placemaking. And this is what we'll focus on for the remainder of this talk, and I'll turn it over to my co-author.
Thank you. Hello. So I'm going to talk a bit about distribution. Now, first I want to state out of the box that if Yelp and Zillow, 2 platforms we've already mentioned, are themselves already distributed systems. And in fact, what they do is make it easy to assemble and integrate discourses from a lot of different sources, whether they're individuals or companies. But intentionally or not, these discourses can do harm, right? Primarily because they promote a kind of consumer-oriented perspective on place, which drives what we've labeled as the consumption side of gentrification. So we're interested in asking, how can distributed placemaking be done otherwise? And I'm going to talk about one project that we've been working on in collaboration with data artist Jared Thorpe called the Map Room, which seeks to create new and more equitable settings for distributing the work of placemaking. Map rooms are spaces in which we can collaboratively and creatively confront existing data on the places we live and try to contribute our own lived experiences and create new representations in the process. Map rooms build on a long history of work in participatory mapping and counter mapping that's been shared here at CHI and other places that's already really demonstrated how maps can be used to challenge dominant representations of place. So the first map room happened in St. Louis, and it was a collaboration with a museum there and only lasted approximately 60 days. But you can see here some of the features of the map room and how it works. What people are creating is actually a physical map, in this case on canvas. And they're drawing that map with markers and pens and paint, sometimes sticking things on the map. And that work, it's manual work, but it's guided digitally because there's a projector overhead that's showing people where streets are and allowing them to overlay different data layers. And primarily this project is about accessibility. You can see down on the lower left that you have middle school kids making maps. They're huge scale maps. A lot of people work on them collaboratively, and they're sharing their own perspectives. In Atlanta, we've been developing another map room that's more focused explicitly on issues of gentrification and really a response to rapid development that's happening in the city. This is one example that we focused on. It's called the Atlanta Beltline, and it's a green infrastructure project that has taken this disused rail line, or a series of disused rail lines that kind of surround the city, and turned them into a linear park which sounds nice, but has been shown by several studies to increase property values in the surrounding area. And a lot of low-income communities are already seeing the Beltline, which is still in development, as a driver of gentrification. So here you can see we actually have created a wide format map room intended to make these long maps. They're actually 16 feet long and 4 feet wide. And that's enabled by a projector that's actually suspended on a rail that moves back and forth. So the idea with these map rooms is they actually manifest differently in different places. And we're setting them up in a number of different cities. So this is work, you can see here some students drawing maps. This is work that can be pedagogical, but it could also be practical, providing tools to community groups to create their own representations that can be presented publicly to counter representations like we might see on Yelp or Zillow. It's not an alternative to those services, but rather we think of it as an antidote, helping people critically and creatively reflect on the relationship between data and place. Here's a close-up of one of those maps. Here's a technical diagram of the Atlanta map for those who are interested, but more importantly for us, it's not just a technical device, it's a social space in which we can share our perspectives on data. And as I said, we're hoping to support further map rooms in the future. And this is just one example to kind of try to suggest how some of this counter-gentrification work might be done. Obviously, there's much more work that's necessary to think about how do we engage in gentrification through HCI, but we believe that we have the ability and in fact the responsibility to actually challenge publicly the spatial expressions of inequality that surround us. Thank you. And I think we'll take some questions if we have time.
Thank you very much. Again, if anybody has a question, we've got time for one or two.
Hi, Elizabeth Resor from UC Berkeley. Thank you so much. This is great. I'm wondering if something that I'm noticing is a difference in scale. You could say that Zillow and Yelp have a placelessness. You can access and view their content everywhere. I think people actually use that to buy homes without seeing them. Whereas what you're doing is very placed and situated. And it reminds me a bit of the discussion we had after the first paper about sort of scale and design processes. And I don't know, this is not ending with a question mark, but maybe you have thoughts based on those words.
I'll just say something about that because my work focuses a lot on how do we bring place back into the design of digital media. For a long time, going back to McLuhan and Negroponte, there's been this sense that digital media should be place agnostic. It shouldn't matter where you are. And I actually have a new book out called All Data Are Local, which really, if you're interested, introduces a lot of these ideas. Sorry I had to make that pitch.
It was perfect, though. It was
Next question? Okay. I can pass it to you after. Hi, Lily, Ronnie. Thank you so much for expanding my imagination of how HCI could have something to do with these issues. Two things that it reminds me of is so you're drawing attention to how HCI contributes to the valorization of place, and so that's actually a nice frame for thinking about assetization too, so like Airbnb or your car for Uber. So I feel like there's like broader, now we can start pulling this lever onto more things. I guess one question I had was, is design, do you think, are there ways beyond design to actually work on these issues? Like if HCI is particularly good at unpacking the way interfaces and infrastructures change our relationships to each other in the material world, like should we be doing reports to policymakers who are considering the implications of Airbnb? Or like, are there things that we can do that are not innovation, but are contributing our labor?
Yeah, certainly. That's a great question, and that's sort of obscured. Yeah, that's obscured through we only presented this one dimension, which is, distribution, and that's primarily focused with design. But the other 6 dimensions drawn from the framework talk about recognition, which is about amplifying existing activist work, The other ones are about reciprocity, which goes into thinking about different policy implications, like drawing from Stephen Jackson's, policy knot. So all of that is covered in the paper.
Yeah, thank you very much.